Hi. Well, it looks like we're already off to a really good start having our Michael Sandel conversation. And I want to talk a little bit about the lecture that you watched and try to situate it in the context of some of the literature that we've reviewed this week. Particularly, I want to spend some time talking about the trolley dilemma and the footbridge dilemma and how that relates to how we interpret what's going on in a moral situation and, more importantly, how we prioritize a variety of different competing values when we're trying to identify what is the right thing to do and obviously to try to act on it. The trolley dilemma is particularly interesting, and if you haven't heard it before, it's well established in the ethics literature to talk about it, teach it, to do research about it, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that research in just a minute, but I've taught it in class many times, and I've had experiences that are very similar to most people who teach ethics and use the trolley dilemma, and that's that when you're first teaching the trolley dilemma, when you're first setting up the scenario where you're in front of these tracks and a trolley is speeding down towards you and you have an option. You can either choose to let the trolley take its course, in which 5 people would die, or you can act by pulling a lever, and 1 person would die. And there's the initial stage, which is the bargaining stage, and that's where you're trying to find other possibilities. Can I throw myself onto the tracks? Do I have time to get down and untie somebody? That type of bargaining. And because it's a moral dilemma that's been created to have a certain kind of conversation, the moderator, the professor, will always say, no, that's not a possibility. But ask, why would you want to do that? Now, the next thing that comes up is the gathering of information. And that is, well, what do I know about what's going on here? And are there people on the trolley? And will they get hurt based on what I do? And the questions will start to get raised about, well, who are these people that are being tied up? How do they get there? Is it their own fault that they're there? Are they old or young? And that's an interesting conversation to ask why. Do I know them? Is one set of them a group of criminals? And then there's a vote. And then as people vote, most people choose to pull the lever, and the reason they choose to pull the lever is because of the math. So basically, it's just a very straightforward kind of equation where you have the opportunity to save, in sum, 4 lives. You're killing 1 where the other one would kill 5. And not everybody does, but overwhelmingly the majority does that. And when they're asking for more information, what they're really trying to do is to add some variables to the equation. You know, you're weighing the lives equally when you say that it's either 5 or 1, but if you can add value to the lives differently, either devaluing them or valuing them more because of these things that we just talked about, whether they're criminals or not, whether you know them or not, what age they are. All these types of things lead to very interesting conversations about how we value human life. Now, you skip forward to the footbridge dilemma. And in the footbridge dilemma, you have the very large man who's standing on the footbridge. You have the opportunity to push this person off the platform. And oftentimes, in fact, every time I've ever taught this, the class would completely flip. And so if 90% of the class would pull the lever, then 90% of the class would not push the man. And that's an interesting change because there are a few things going on. One of them is that the math is the same. You have 1 person who would die, saving the lives of 5. Arguments often come up like, well, that person was just an innocent bystander. He wasn't going to be killed unless I did something. But it's important to remember that in the original trolley dilemma, the person who you sent to their death by pulling the lever wasn't going to die either. The trolley was not headed towards them. They were at best, or at worst I should say, they were going to get maybe a sunburn. And then after the 5 people were killed, you would go down there and you would untie that 1 person, or somebody would, and they would be fine. Just like the person on the platform would be fine. There was a person who wasn't going to be killed. You did something, and they died. So what's different? It's not really about the math anymore, at least not completely about the math. What are the other priorities that are taking precedent? And we talked about this in the discussion board. And of course, this prioritization stage is something that came up in the article I asked you to read back on Tuesday. So as we think about this, we have to ask what those priorities are. And for different people, there are different priorities. For many, they'll identify that there's just an affective value. It feels different pushing somebody rather than pulling a lever. And for others, there are other kinds of priorities that come to mind. The legal priorities, conscience priorities. Can I live with myself if I do this? Will I get arrested for murder if I do this? And they seem a little bit more present because of the physicality of pushing that person. The other thing to keep in mind is how that person is situated in relation to you. When you're standing in front of the lever in the original scenario, there's this person who got tied up to a train track. Now, you've never been tied up to a trolley track before. It's hard for you to imagine a scenario in which you would get tied up to a trolley track. That person's very different from you. However, this person who's on the platform with you, you're on that platform right now. You already have something in common. You're probably coming from a very similar place because you probably walked there, and you're probably going to a very similar place because presumably you're waiting for the same trolley. There are these things that you share. You're there at the same time of day. This is somebody you have a kinship with. You don't understand why exactly, but they're like you. And it's harder to do this to somebody who is like you than somebody who is not like you. And there are all kinds of ramifications as to why that kind of issue becomes a priority for people when they're going through these dilemmas. So as you continue your dialogue, and like I said, it's a good dialogue so far. I'm happy with the level of thought that's going on here, and the interactions I think have been really interesting to read. I want you to continue with these thoughts in mind, thinking about how do we prioritize different things. Not just the what should I do because it's the moral thing to do priority, but all these other priorities that create not just interference or noise, because it's more than that. They're genuine. They're really things that you value, whether you feel like you should or not. They are. You value them, and they're competing. So how do you choose which one you value most when you're deciding what to do? Again, good job, and I look forward to hearing more of what you have to say online.